drawing. This is something Oliver did, and I think it's pretty amazing. I mean, I don't know anything about kids, but I would say that's pretty good. And he absolutely loves Trolls World Tour right now, but I mean, I have to question sometimes our parenting, because like he's always into the bad guys, or like the bad guys who are supposed to be the bad guys. And like he'll look at like ocean documentaries because he loves ocean documentaries, but like when a great white comes up, he's like, oh, I hope they eat someone. It's like, anyways, hey everybody, welcome back to Old Topics, New Conversations. So if you've been following along at all, you would know that OTNC, Old Topics, New Conversations, was a Thursday night thing. And so you might be asking you, why is he doing it on a Sunday morning? Which is a really great question. I mean, was it because he was too lazy to do 3 videos a week? Yes. Maybe I shouldn't admit that online. Or is it because the topic that we're going to be covering is so important that he had to share it on a Sunday morning? Yes, that's the reason. But honestly, it really is the reason, because I wanted to look at a topic that comes up in everyone's life. No matter who you are, no matter where you come from, no matter what you believe, this topic will ultimately come up. And the question is, why is it you believe what you believe? And more specifically, we're going to be looking at why Christians can have a firm foundation in what they believe. Why is it that they actually believe that? Why is it that they would go to a church? Why is it that they would follow Jesus? Is there any reason, or is it just emotional? And the reason I think this is so important, because it's been my experience when I talk to people and strangers, and more specifically Christians, and ask them, why is it that you believe in what you believe in? Why is it that you believe in Jesus? The answers that I get are rather unstable, maybe a little weak, not so sure, kind of questionable answers. I mean, think about it for a second. If someone were to ask you, why are you a Christian? What would you say to them? If you believe in Jesus, why do you believe in Jesus? Go ahead, I'm gonna give you a second. Time's up. But if you're thinking some thoughts, or you have thought some of these thoughts like, well, because the Bible tells me so. Well, I've always been a Christian. I just am. I just do follow Jesus. I'm not really sure. It's really personal and I can't really explain it to you. And if you thought any of those answers, your answer might fall in those categories of being unstable, maybe a little weak, not so sure, kind of questionable answers. And the reason I say that is because if you really think about it, if an atheist came up to you, if a Buddhist came up to you, if a witch, if a Satanist, if someone just from some other belief came up to you and you were having this conversation and you asked them, why is it that you believe what you believe? And they told you, well, I read it in a book. I've just always been one. It's deeply personal and I can't really explain it to you. Would that really cause you to think twice about their religion? Would that cause you to be like, oh, maybe I should make a switch over? Or would you even be able to say, oh, that sounds reasonable? Probably not. And if it's not good enough for us, then why would we think that answer would be good enough for anyone else? And so this is why I thought it would be a good time to just kind of lay out some foundations of like, why is it reasonable to believe in Christianity? Why is it even reasonable to believe and follow Jesus? What are the reasons to believe? And while some of us might not see the importance of going over issues like this, I want to ask you 2 questions. First question being, have you or someone you know ever struggled with doubting God? And the second question is, what would you tell yourself or that someone who is struggling with God? What would you say to them? How would you encourage them? How would you let them know that God is totally real? And if you don't know the answer, or if your answer fell into one of those categories that we talked about earlier, this is why it's important. We want to make a compelling case of why it's reasonable to believe in God, and not just an emotional response, not just something that we grew up with, not just because, but really a reason to believe. Right now in culture, more than ever probably, religion and ethics have been put into this, you do you, boo, kind of category, or a bigger word for it is relativism. This relativistic idea that, you do you and I do me and we'll be okay. Because you make your right and I'll make my right, and then we'll all live in harmony. You'll all live in harmony. That's funny because I mentioned trolls earlier. If you know what I'm talking about, then you're in the know. But really, when it comes to religion and ethics, it's just like whatever makes you feel good, then that's your truth. And while religion and ethics have been put in that category, what we see is a rise in science to take more authority in those places. And as science rises, there seems to be this gap between religion and science. And it's like, okay, well, maybe religion will just work itself out of, our culture because it's becoming more relativized. It's becoming more of like whatever feels good to you, then that's what's right. But on the other side, science has taken more authority to say, listen, you don't need religion because science is proving all of these things. And I really have to ask the question, is that true? But this is the reality, that science, reason, and logic aren't adverse to religion. In fact, the sciences, logic, and reason should actually strengthen your faith. They should give you a firm foundation in believing the things that you believe. And this is why we have something called apologetics. And apologetics basically means that you're giving a reason, an argument for something that you believe in, more specifically your faith. And so just so you know, I've given you two big words that they're going to be a test at the end. Just kidding, there's no test, but you should probably be familiar with them. Relativism, this idea that you do you, boo. It's you make your own rights and you make your own wrongs and no one's really wrong. It's just kind of your own preference. And apologetics, this idea that you can make an argument or give a reason to why you believe what you actually believe. And the reason I'm so passionate about apologetics, again, giving a reason to why you actually believe, is because when I was a new believer, I would have all of these conversations with friends and strangers, and I would walk away frustrated because I don't know, I just felt like they just weren't getting it. I mean, why weren't they jumping on this Jesus bandwagon? I mean, I did. I read a book. My new set of friends were all Jesus freaks. It was something so personal that I couldn't really explain. So, maybe that's why they didn't get it. Because I wasn't very good at communicating it other than it was a personal experience and I read it in a book and everyone around me was now a Christian. But honestly, I really did have a frustration because I didn't know how to explain what it was I actually believed. I didn't know how to back it up. And this became even more real to me when one day I was having a conversation with a friend of a friend who was just struggling with life. He struggled to find his identity and hope and purpose and meaning and just really life. I mean, struggling with the idea of like, is it worth it to keep on going? And when we would meet up for coffee, I would ask questions to see how he's doing, to see what he's thinking and try to give some, kind of good answers, at least the best that I knew at the time, some life advice, things like, hey man, like God honestly loves you and cares for you where you are at right now. He knows what you're going through and he cares about that. Like, listen to what this Bible passage says. And not that any of those are bad answers, that you should stray away from those things. But then he asked me a question that really kind of rocked my world because I had no idea how to respond. I just kind of sat there and stuttered, and it wasn't like he was trying to be condescending. It wasn't like he was trying to be mean. He was honestly trying to just figure out what the answer is to all these life questions. And so as we were sitting there, he just asked me, but how do you know that all of this is true? Like, you read your Bible and you pray and you pull out these verses and you tell me God loves me, but how do you even know that that's real? And I didn't know what to say. And it's a really important question for us to start asking ourselves. How do we actually know that what we believe is real? How do we know truth? How do we know that we can trust the Bible? How do we even know that there is a God who does care about us? How do we know those things? And what do we do when we feel like there isn't a God who cares for us? Because that feeling will come. That doubt will seep in at some point. It really is a powerful question that made me stop. And I really had to struggle with it. And I hope you struggle with it, because struggling with God is a good thing. I always like to think of it like this, that if you're not struggling with God, then you're probably not growing, because God is so big that you can't help but struggle like, why would God allow this to happen? Why would God do that? How does this make sense? Those are the kind of struggles that make you grow, by wrestling with who God is. And trust me, we'll get to those questions that I raised earlier, or that he raised earlier, because it's all about giving a reason to why we believe. And part of giving that reason to why we believe is answering those questions. So we'll get to there some point. But today, I really want to ask the question and set the stage for this. What would it look like to be an apologist? To be someone who makes a defense or an argument for their faith? What would it look like to be an ambassador for Jesus? What would it look like to just be a Jesus follower who could give a good reason to why they believe what they actually believe? 1 Peter 3:15. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and respect. 1 Corinthians 5:18-20. All this is from God, who reconciled us to himself through Christ and gave us the ministry of reconciliation, that God was reconciling the world to himself in Christ, not counting people's sins against them. And he has committed to us the message of reconciliation. We are therefore Christ's ambassadors, as though God were making his appeal through us. We implore you on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God. Now, I always like to go back and look at these verses because it kind of sums up what it means to be a Jesus follower in the sense of knowing what you believe and going out and reaching people. And the one thing that I've noticed in these two passages is that you're called to go and be with people. And if you kind of read between the lines, these people are supposed to look a certain way, that they're supposed to be people who are asking questions, people who need an ambassador, who don't know Jesus. And with that in mind, have you ever experienced a time where maybe you were at school or at the market or just in a random place where a stranger came up to you and said, "Oh my gosh, you have to tell me, where do you find your hope? What is it that you do that makes you special and makes you walk in this world just different?" The odds are probably not. And if it has happened to you, it might have been by mistake or just a really, really rare occasion. Why? Because people just don't do that, especially strangers, if at all. I mean, how would a stranger know to go up to you and ask you, where do you find your hope in, if they have no idea if you even have hope? I mean, if you're just standing in line, how much, of God's presence or God's spirit could you actually be exuding? Maybe a lot, I don't know, maybe I'm just weird, but for the most part, probably not going to show it a whole bunch in that, split second or 5 seconds or 10 seconds or minute while you're in line. So probably not going to happen. And this kind of brings me to my first point, is that people won't ask what they don't know. Or better put, people won't ask who they don't know. If they don't know you, then why would they even care or know to ask about the hope that's inside of you? I mean, people were created to question so many things about life. I mean, people were created and will have questions like, what is life all about? Is there meaning to it? What's the purpose of life? What am I supposed to be doing? Is there a God out there? Is there something bigger than myself? And the great news as a Jesus follower is that you actually have the answer to all of these. The answer to all of these things are found in Jesus. Now, the sub question to that is, does your life reflect that? And I'm not saying that you act perfect or that your life's not without problems, but this is kind of what I am saying. Do you live your life in a way that when you do have problems or when things are a mess, that the answer always goes back to Jesus? Or are you just kind of wandering through life just like everyone else, trying to figure out what the answer is to these questions? That you'll try a little bit of here and you'll try a little bit over there. You're just testing the waters with a lot of things, trying to figure out the answer to, what is life? Does it have meaning? Does it have purpose? And who is God? So the first thing on my, made up list of what it would be like to be a good apologist or ambassador or a Jesus follower who can make a defense for their faith is know people. Be around people who are vastly different than you, who believe different things. Go out and find people and befriend them, knowing that they don't believe what you believe. Because what happens when we become Christians is that sometimes we can tend to get stuck in a Christian bubble. And it's not like we do it on purpose, but when you find yourself in this Christian bubble, you find yourself hanging around with all the people who act and do everything that you do. You go to church and they go to church, and then you go to the church events and you go to the church hangouts and you do all this church stuff, and you find yourself just hanging around with those people. But sometimes we're just salt and light to people who are already salt and light. And we never make time because we're already busy with our people that we don't find those people who actually need salt and light. Again, if you're salt and light, people can't ask what they don't know or who they don't know unless they know you. If they want to find hope and they want to know about life and meaning and God, well then what better place to go than someone who has those answers or can give a reason to say, it's because of Jesus. It's not because of anything that we're trying to do that's different. It's not another fad. It's not another this or that or adding to your life. It's all about Jesus. So take a second to really ask yourself, who knows you? Who are your unchristian, unbelieving friends? And if you can't think of any, well, we're kind of just in that place of being that person in the market, hoping that someone looks at us and asks, where's your hope found? It's probably not going to happen, which really is the most exciting thing to happen to you is when someone asks you, what is it about your life that makes it different? You get to share Jesus with them. But again, that only happens if people know you. I mean, think about it in your own life. Who do you ask questions of? Do you ask questions of strangers? You know, these big cosmological life, questions. Do you ask them to just people that you've never met before? Or do you ask those questions of people you trust, people you've had relationship with? So again, go out and be with people. I think that's just the first step of being a good Christian, is that you're not just salt and light to people who are already salt and light, but you're salt and light to people who really need salt and light. And then the second thing that I have on this imaginary list of what it would be like to be a good apologist or a good Jesus follower who knows how to defend their faith or can make a reason or a logical conclusion to why they believe what they believe is just know your basics. I mean, do you know your basics? The basics of what? Exactly. Hey, exactly what? That's what I'm asking. When you think about your faith and when you think about sharing that faith with someone else, what is the scary thing about it? I mean, there's probably a billion things that come to mind, but I can definitely tell you one of those things that will come to mind is that you're afraid to look silly. You're afraid that you won't know enough. You're afraid that you might make Jesus look bad. And so sometimes that fear pushes us to do nothing, which brings us back to the first part where people need to just know us and trust us and build relationship with us before they start to even ask those questions. And again, if you look back at those passages that we referenced earlier, 1 Peter 3:15 and 2 Corinthians 5:18-20, you see that they go out to people, but they also know some stuff. Be prepared to give an answer, but with gentleness and respect. You are an ambassador for Jesus. And when we talk about ambassador, it's really someone who stands in place for someone else. Like if I were going to send you to go to a school and be my representative, you would be my ambassador. And as an ambassador, I would hope that you would represent me well. That, you wouldn't say things and do things that would be like, okay, if that's how his representative acts, is that how Stephen acts? Is that what he's like? So don't make me look bad. And just like you wouldn't want to make anyone else look bad, let's not do that for Jesus. Let's not make him look bad. And part of not making him look bad is knowing who you're representing. What did Jesus do? What did he stand for? What has he done for the world? Do you know that? And do you know how to explain that? And more importantly, do you know how to live it out? So in understanding the basics of trying to give someone an answer or trying to be a good ambassador, I think there are three things that we kind of have to have a grasp on or an idea of how to answer. And the first one is, do you know who Jesus is? I mean, is he a guru? Is he just another teacher? What makes him special, if anything? The second question is, why can we trust the Bible? I mean, if this is the source that you keep going back to, is there any reason to trust it? I mean, isn't this just another man-written book? And why would you trust something that's been translated so many times, over and over and over? It has been translated so many times, right? And the third question is having an idea of what else is out there? Like all these other religions, why is Christianity special? What makes it different? Aren't they all kind of the same, just under a different title? And don't worry, we'll get to all these questions, but I want you to start thinking about them. And also, don't forget to come back next week because it's one of my favorite subjects, truth. All right, guys, well, have a blessed day and go out and be ambassadors for Christ. Bye.